to prepare the Bible study. And the reason why is because of the topic. And it's a hard one because it's something that troubles a lot of people who are maybe new to Christian faith, or they question their Christian faith, or it even goes into people who argue against the Christian faith. So it's this topic that is really, really hard because so many people on the Christian side and on the other side struggle with it. And so really, I'm going to say I don't have all the knowledge and all the answers for it because it is something really hard to understand. So I have a lot of questions, and the idea is to discuss what we're supposed to gain from it. Because chapter 31 deals with God's vengeance on the Midianites. And there's a lot to that can be really hard, I say, in the secular world to read and go, why would God allow this? And so that's why you can see on the handout and everything there's a disclaimer to begin with. The disclaimers is just important for us to recognize that there's various people. Like I said, Christians, new Christians, Christians struggling with their faith, or non-Christians, people who go against God, who really struggle with a lot of the stories in the Old Testament. If you read Joshua, Judges, and Kings, you'll see a lot of things in there that can cause people to just question. But we're going to be focusing on one of these issues. I mean, when God tells the Israelites to go in and kill the Midianites, he's eliminating a whole group of people. And so people question that. And I ask that we examine these texts, not from our own cultural, society, moral standards. Because that's when people start questioning it, that's their first instinct, is to look at it from our human perspective. We have to look at it from God's perspective. What is his moral perspective on why he did this? And I have written down Isaiah 55, verses 8 through 9. I thought this was a good one for us to look at this study from. It says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than yours, and my thoughts than your thoughts." So you have to understand, this was done by God's decree. Everything we're about to read is his thoughts are higher than ours. His moral ground is way higher than ours. We cannot compare. So I want to get that perspective because this is a topic that I think could have great discussion, because if you are evangelizing and you know somebody who either does not believe in God and they start asking these types of questions on how could God eliminate these group of people, or even today we're going to see how could God eliminate all the women and all the children in this situation, you have to, as a Christian, have some ground to stand on to just not justify, but to respond to something like that. Or if you're having a conversation with someone who is a Christian who struggles with how could God allow something like this to happen, you have to have something to respond to. You might not have all the answers, but you need to give something to that. So it's a challenging topic. I struggled with it this week. I'm looking forward to it, though, so it's a weird thing to struggle with it and look forward to the discussion. So let's just dive right in and we're going to look at just snippets of verses for the main themes. And the first one is in chapter 31, verse 1. And so now it says, "The Lord said to Moses, take vengeance on the Midianites for the Israelites. And after that, you'll be gathered to your people." So next week, we'll talk about the Moses being gathered, along with doing a recap. But the main focus here is take vengeance on the Midianites for the children of Israel. So first off, how would you define the word vengeance? And what context do we use that word? Payback? Getting even? If I want to exact vengeance on somebody, I want payback. I want to get even. Judgment.
Hurt.
I'm sorry? Hurt.
It's a reaction to a real or a perceived wrong. You did it to me, or I believe you did it to me, and so therefore I'm doing this back to you.
I like that you said real or perceived. Because sometimes when we, as humans try and exact vengeance. Like you said, sometimes I might perceive you did this wrong to me, but really you didn't. So when we have vengeance, it's a human vengeance, and it's reactionary on something that may or may not have happened. The definition that we have is, I look at, I think it was Oxford Dictionary was punishment inflicted, retribution exacted for a wrong. I do wish they would have put on real or perceived wrong, because that's sometimes what happens. But God's use for this word is different. And that's what we have to go through in some of the stuff, and we see it a lot in society, especially when you hear the word, society say the word love is love, the phrase love is love, and we're talking about Christianity and God. There's so many different words of love in the Bible, you have to understand which one's being used. And the same thing with vengeance. Again, I'm going to probably pronounce it wrong. I tried to listen to it this morning so I can make sure I say it right. I just wrote down the pronunciation. The word used is nekalmal, which the Septuagint translates this into akdiko or akdike, which means out or from justice. So when God says he's doing vengeance, it is coming from his justice, what he determines to be right. So if you look at our definition of punishment inflicted by a perceived action or wrong, real or perceived, God's definition of adjustment is coming out from his justice. It's a completely different interpretation than what we use in our society. So another question is, why is God commanding the Israelites to take vengeance on the Midianites? So in other words, what previous actions were committed by them that caused God's anger to be on them? So does anybody remember what the Midianites did before that is causing God to now exact his rightful vengeance?
Idolatry.
I'm sorry?
He led them to idolatry, or they led them to idolatry.
How are they led to idolatry?
Just through examples.
Seduced.
Living with them.
Yeah, there's an example. What was it?
They were seduced. They were the women seduced the men and brought them to worship and into sexual immorality.
Yeah, back when Balaam was going through and he did his false prophecies, did the prophecies, is trying to curse them but bless them, and it didn't work to curse them. Afterwards, he went with the Midianite king and told them, here's how you can curse the Israelites. And they sent their women in there, and the sexual immorality occurred. It was the one where the priest took the spear through both the woman and the man. Afterwards, they came in and they tried to infiltrate the Israelites, and they really got them to start sinning. False idolatry, pagan worship, sexual immorality. And so now God is taking his vengeance on this. So we ask the question, I say, what's the difference between vengeance and God's and ours? So what is the difference between godly vengeance and human vengeance? Because if someone asks you about this scenario, about how can God take vengeance on, soon we will read, women and children, men, women, and children, what is the difference between godly vengeance then versus human? Because when people ask it, we're looking at it from the human perspective. So how can we see God's vengeance as being rightful and just?
I would say human vengeance would have an emotional part to it, whereas God's would be just totally by the book kind of thing. It's not emotional.
That's the main thing. Human vengeance, we're going to be driven by emotion, which makes it really reactionary. And if I'm sure, I know for a fact, in my past, I have done something to take revenge in some way or respond in some way in a negative manner. When you do that, what if you are really in the faith, or even some people are not, is when you do it and you enact revenge in human nature by responding with emotion, what's usually your response afterwards? I say if you have a good moral character.
Regret.
Yeah. So when we respond emotionally, a lot of things we do is we go really rash and we go extreme. And then all of a sudden we start to look like, oh, I shouldn't have responded that way. Oh, I shouldn't have said that way. And so our vengeance is driven completely different from God's. I mean, what is God's vengeance across the board really about? What does he want for the world?
Salvation.
He wants salvation, which means he wants sin to be eliminated from his people. And that's what's going on here is he needs sin eliminated. Ricky?
I think God has emotion too. I think when you look at Lamentations, you see the tears there in the Old Testament. And also in the New Testament, you see where Jesus wept, showing a sign of emotion to concern of the lost. Because I always go back to in the beginning, he created us in his image, according to his likeness. And when you think about that, you look at we were supposed, in the beginning, he created us for righteousness. And then we see where Satan comes into the picture and he creates a distorted image. And it's ungodly type of effect where we are. God can't tolerate that. He can't tolerate impurity, sin in his presence. So I see emotional thing going on with God as well. He wants all men to be saved.
Yeah, there's an emotional aspect. I think when you talk about the emotional, it's more reactionary emotional than, what'd you say?
Overreaction.
Overreaction type of thing.
And I would say God's vengeance is always just and fair,
Yes.
where ours would not be.
And a very common practice, I'd say, of preachers and commentators and people who give sermons and studies. I found one person who decided to do it based off the letter V, and it was, play on words, is human vengeance is vindictive. Godly vengeance is vindicating. And I read that and I thought that was a very good way of thinking about the two types of perspectives is when we do vengeance or we want vengeance for us, it's payback, it's vindictive. But when God does it, it's trying to restore. And it's trying to be vindicating us. Just glasses or, I'm sorry, I saw a hand.
No.
Okay. So next is, can someone read 1 Peter 4:17?
For it is time for judgment to begin with the household of God. And if it begins with us first, what will be the outcome for those who do not obey the gospel of God?
And so to connect this, I said, how does this situation with the Midianites, what God's telling them to do, go take vengeance on the Midianites for the children of Israel, how does this relate to 1 Peter? I remember when that used to be my child. I hope it's okay. Where did vengeance first occur? I'm sorry, where did judgment first occur? That's the way to ask it. Where did punishment first occur? Which group of people were punished first? Yeah, the Israelites were punished first. The Israelites, back in Numbers 25, they had the plague that came through. Moses told told people to grab the leaders or grab the men and to kill them for participating in the sexual idolatry. Judgment first came on the Israelites, and now the judgment is coming on those who caused the sin. So first, the judgment came on God's people, and now the judgment is being finished on the other people. And so there is a lot that goes along those lines for it. Romans 12:19 says, we are told to not take revenge, that it is God's to avenge, not us. That's a paraphrase. It is God's to avenge sin. It is not ours to avenge sin. And then Revelation 21:8 says that God's judgment and wrath will be carried out on those who live a life dedicated to sinful vices. How does that relate? God's judgment and wrath will be carried out on those who live a life dedicated to sinful vices. Again, those are paraphrases if you want to flip to the verses. Does anybody know what the culture was like? And this is hard, like I said, it was hard for me to study, is what the culture was like for the Midianites during that time. This is when you wish you really had a good historian in the room. Yeah, I'm looking at it. Huh? What'd you say?
Not my people.
Not your people. I looked at a few things, and you hear it's hit and miss. You hear, I read some that said some things and some that say, well, there's no evidence of it, but some of the things is they participated in. With one of the gods they worshipped, I think Molech. It said they participated in child sacrificing, sexual idolatry. The gods they worshiped dealt with pagan worship and dealt with sexual worship. Some said they dealt with bestiality, and some said that they dealt with actual, let's say, pedophilia. It was a culture that was completely against God and turned away from God. So when God says he is going to have judgment and wrath carried out on those who live a life dedicated to sinful vices, this is an example of what's about to happen. These people have turned to sin, completely to sin, and not to God. And now the wrath is going to come on them. Well, God's asking for the wrath to come on them. Any comments? Ricky?
Well, I look at sin as being infectious, and he has to cut it down. He has to cut it because the whole tribe is going to be wiped out with sin, and that's how we have to look at sin. You have to deal with it and try to get people to repent and move on. If you don't, it'll just wipe out people very quickly, and you could wind up doing things you don't expect to be doing.
Sin is infectious. It's nice to kind of recap a little bit too, is those who challenged Aaron's priesthood, Korah and the others, what did God do to those people? Because that was a sin. He killed them. The earth swallowed them up whole. So you go through, God's judgment occurred on Israel first in a lot of areas, and they removed the sin because they needed to get rid of that infectious part. Any other comments? So the next snippet is from verses 7 through 8. There we go. Didn't divide it. Verses 7 through 8 say, they fought against Midian as the Lord commanded Moses and killed every man. Among their victims were the 5 kings of Midian, and they also killed Balaam with the sword. So my question here is, the last we heard of Balaam was when he was giving the prophetical blessings, when he tried to curse Israel, but he ended up blessing them. Why was Balaam killed then in this act of vengeance?
Well, God knew his heart. He was evil. He was always looking for the dollar attached to whatever he's going to do.
He was looking for the dollar. He told the king how to curse the Israelites by creeping in, letting the women go in, and turning them to sexual idolatry. Any other comments on that? Because this is interesting, because the last words out of Balaam's mouth, one of the last words out of Balaam's mouth during his blessings was, who can count the dust of Jacob or number the fourth part of Israel? Balaam said, let me die the death of the upright, and let me end like his Jacob or his Israel. Balaam asked to die like Jacob, like Israel, to be like them in one of his blessings. So he said one thing, and what did you say his heart was filled with? So his mouth said one thing, and his actions said another thing. And so I say there's a lot in the Old Testament that we can look at to go how God says for us, even as Christians, to go through. We hear all the time how if our mouths say one thing and our body says another thing, or our actions say another thing, how that is not something that Christ wants for us. So though he did mouth righteous words, he did not live righteously, and he resulted in the death of sins that went through it. Can someone read 1 Timothy 6, 9 through 10?
But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evils. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs.
So how does that relate?
What was the question? I didn't hear it.
How does that verse relate to this scenario? Or what we can take away from this scenario? What was Balaam motivated by? Sorry? Wealth, personal, probably position, something along those lines. He was motivated by money, by position, by power, he was turning his desire to a motivation that went for human nature. And we see in 1 Timothy that those things lead to the root of evil. So Balaam is a brief snippet in the Old Testament, but there's so much we can gain on what happened to him, how he responded in the beginning to now, as an example for our behaviors. How does this command by God of killing the Midianites relate to how he has dealt with similar sins committed by Israel? So what sins have we read about so far in Numbers that Israel has participated in? Or even what sins do we know from Exodus before this time that Israel has participated in?
Pretty much every sin you can think of.
And they really have. They've complained against God. They've turned against God. They went to battle when God said don't go to battle. They went through a lot. Sexual idolatry, the golden calf, all this sin. And how has God dealt with it every single time? What has God done to Israel every time that there has been a sin so far? Did he leave it alone? He's punished them. The punishment has occurred on Israel first for all the sins, and now it's occurring on the else. In Deuteronomy 18, 9 through 12, God, if you read the verses, God commands the Israelites to not practice pagan worship, the pagan worship of other civilizations. So it is something that God has told them repeatedly, and they keep on going to do. And so what happens is those in charge got killed. Those who led it to infect the Israelites, God's vengeance was taken on them. And then this is the part, that part you can read through verse 8 and go, okay, you can see what's going on. And then you go to the next part. And this is the part I say that is what I refer to as the disclaimer in the beginning that I think is hard. Because you do hear the questions of how can an all-loving God allow bad things to happen? Or how can a God who we say God is love, but in the Old Testament say kill all the women and kill all the children? These are things that some people question. And I say it's the hard part because we need to be able to have a ground to stand on to respond in some way to it. We might not have all the answers, but a response is required of us in some way to help those people or to guide them to finding the answers. So I did verses 9, 14, and 17 through 18 as the snippet, and it says, the Israelites captured the Midianite women and children and took all the Midianite herds, flocks, and goods as plunder. Moses was angry with the officers of the army, the commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds who returned from the battle. Now kill all the boys and kill every woman who has slept with a man but save for yourselves every girl who has never slept with a man. So they went in, killed the kings, killed Balaam, got the victory, which in itself is amazing if you read Numbers, because they had, it says 12,000, 1,000 from each tribe that went in. It was led by the priest. So they took the victory, not a single one was lost. So itself, you could see that God was in charge of their victory. He was in charge of it all. But then afterwards, the commanders come up and Moses is there, and Moses sees all the women are alive and the boys are alive, and he's angry. And he tells them, kill all the boys and kill all the women who are not virgins. That's hard to hear from our perspective. If we look at it from our cultural perspective, that's a hard thing to take away, I say, not the godly perspective, from the moral perspective that you might hear from other people. Is how can a God say, do this? And we have to be able to answer it, or be able to help the people guide through it. And there is a reason for it. I don't know all the reasons, because it's not my truth or my knowledge. God's wisdom is, my wisdom is actually, it's supposed to say, the wisdom of man is foolish to God. And so God's wisdom is way above ours. But I do want to address one thing, because I did do this, and like I said, some of it's meant to help us figure out how to have these discussions when they happen. When it says to take every girl who has never slept with a man, some people say that means that they are trying to take them as actual sexual slaves, because that was a practice in the cultural times of that. But if you were to go to Deuteronomy 21, you don't have to, but Deuteronomy 21, 10 through 14, it talks about marrying a captive woman. And it talks about if you are not pleased with her, let her go wherever she wishes. You must not sell her or treat her as a slave, since you have dishonored her. It talks about allowing them to actually mourn the loss of their families. And so that verse, Deuteronomy 21, 10 through 14, talks about how they are to treat captive women. Who they want to take, they decide to take them as a wife, how are they to treat them? And then if they don't, how are they to treat them? And so there is, a common misconception is, oh, that means they get to keep them and treat them like sexual slaves, but that was a practice of the pagan world. That is not a practice of the Israelites. And we know that from previous examples of when the Midianites came in and performed sexual idolatry, they killed the person who did it. And so keep that in mind. These are things that you hear and you can see some people argue with on, and we have to be aware of what it means. So why was Moses so angry with the women being left alive?
They had participated in this seduction of the Israelite men.
They participated in the seduction of the Israelite men, which means, and Ricky, you brought this up, sin being infectious, is when the women came in, they brought the infection into the Israelites' camp. And so God has just said he is eliminating the infection. If they left these women alive, they're still practicing the same thing they were practicing. They've already shown once that they will infiltrate the spirit of Israel and turn them away from God. So they've shown it once that they will do that. They've already done it once. And now, by leaving them alive, Moses is angry, and God is asking for the women to be killed as well, because they've already done it once. They need one, sin needs to have a judgment on it, and two, they'll do it again, and you'll be in the same place Israel will be in the same place you were before. So Moses was angry because that's where the infection started. They are the ones who seduced them and got them turning. What about the male children? I could see in the previous verses, that we read, that the women make sense from a godly perspective. They're the ones who seduced the Israelites and got them to start doing sexual idolatry, worshiping false idols, participating in pagan worship and feasts. I can see that in the previous chapters. Why the male children? Yeah.
Have they been taught by their fathers?
So that is one, yeah. One thing that it goes through is they were taught by their fathers the way, the culture of their life. So if they're taught that way growing up, they're going to continue to teach that way. There's others as well. That's one.
Through the male, their father's lineage is passed on, and so they could claim the Midianite heritage and try to revive the nation and its culture.
So they can claim their Midianite heritage, try and revive their nation and culture.
As they're taught, they will remember what happened to them and their fathers, and they'll exact their vengeance when they get old enough to do so themselves.
Yeah, and the other part is vengeance. They'll exact their vengeance if they go through, because they'll remember what happened. And this was their culture, this was their thing, and they're going to find a way to revive that culture. And so God had said for all the male children to be killed, because again, this is hard to understand. For, like I said, I don't know all the answers, but I'm leaning towards they were raised that way. They'll remember the culture. They'll try and still teach the culture. They'll try and still pass on the culture. Part of it, by the way, is, like I said, they, at least from some of the commentaries, they participated in their sexual things with children. Men participated in sexual things with children, and all these things, they were a part of it. That was how they were raised. It was accepted in their culture. And when they grow, they'll be that way. Part of it is vengeance. Is if you leave that little sin alive, it's going to grow and grow and grow and grow, and they'll exact their vengeance in the future.
Nobody's mentioned, and I'm curious. None of that stuff would pertain to a baby. Male children, does that include the babies? Because the babies would have known.
I don't think it includes the
babies.
babies. I don't think it includes the babies, from what I've been able to look at. I think it includes children. When we use children, I think they're including children who are of a certain age, who have been taught. I don't think it includes the babies because that reason. I don't think.
We hope not for our own, like.
But even then, if it does, it's hard, that's the hard part.
Right, but I mean, none of those reasons, being taught this way, vengeance, they wouldn't know because they were babies and they wouldn't remember, and they could have been taught as somebody else.
Well, my question is why doesn't this apply to the girls too? Like, what makes the girls different than the boys?
See, this is why it's hard.
In their culture, it was a patriarchal society. The husband or the father, the culture and the land and the society passed through the father. So the woman would take, when she married, her husband's culture and lineage, and kind of like Ruth did when she pledged herself that she was leaving her society to become something else. And basically in their society it went that way. That's why they had the problem with the women inheriting the land, because if they married somebody from another tribe, it would pass to their husband because he was the leader of their family. And this was part of the culture. The male children would have been Midianites, where the women, if they married Israelites, became Israelites.
I think the relationship to Ruth was a really good example to answer that question. And honestly, that's where I go from our perspective to God's perspective.
Yeah, like I 100%
Yeah.
agree that God knew things I don't know. You know, like I get that. I just can't have to think like these girls are going to be married or raised by these women, and these women are the reason why the Midianites are falling away. So it's just interesting. It's just.
But the girls are then going to go into, when they're captured, they're going to go into the Israelite community and like take on that culture. Yeah. And they are not the women who caused the sin in the first place. And I don't, the men, the boys would enact the vengeance. I don't think the women would at that point.
To me, annihilation means everybody, wipe out everybody. Now, we know that God says that children under the age of accountability, he takes, they're with him. And being in combat with, going into villages and seeing fear on, especially the children's faces. They look at you with big, scared eyes. They're hiding behind their parents. They're crying. And to be able to have to shoot down, you know, those children. You talk about PTSD. And I never had to do that. And I thank God for that. I don't know if I could have did it if I was ordered to do it.
I imagine, like I said, it's a hard week for this, but I imagine these were the children, like we use the word children and our brain goes right to this tall type of thing. I imagine these are the boys who were of the age of participating in all these sinful things, not the ones too young.
I think you now see what Moses had to go through. He's seeing all of what Bob is talking about. Moses has to do all that. He's also I'm thinking about Moses thinking about what happened in the beginning when God tried to, rescue his people from Pharaoh. They should remember all that power that God demonstrated when he was trying to deliver his people. And it seems like we have a hard time remembering, what God has done in the past to get us to where we are now. And so I think all those things are going through Moses' mind to get him upset as a leader of God's people.
Yeah.
Well, in the past, when God has destroyed the groups or the armies, when Moses went in and took over the armies and stuff, he killed them all. It didn't matter what age you were. So I don't know why it would be different here. And then also, I would think they would kill the baby boys because the mothers would be there to raise those children in the Mennonite way. Like, Moses' mother raised him.
I go through and I don't know.
I don't
So
either,
I want to go from
like,
it's hard to remove yourself from the human perspective as
Right.
I look at it going with the babies, but then I also know it's God's judgment and I can't question it because he knows more. And you brought up so some of the things that happened in the last part of this is in chapter 33, at the end of it, we'll go to still in 31, but I want to bring it up is, it says, but if you do not drive out the inhabitants of the land, those you allow to remain will become barbs in your eyes and thorns in your sides. There is supposed to be a complete removal of sin from the land before they come in. Otherwise, like in 1 Corinthians 5:6, it was to say a little yeast leavens the whole batch. You leave a little bit of sin in there, it's going to leaven the whole thing. It's going to spread. Yeah.
I was just gonna say, the mothers couldn't have lived because the only women or girls that were there were the ones who had not been with the man. So their mothers couldn't have been there. So
Thank you for
they wouldn't
catching
have-
that.
They wouldn't have raised the child.
Yeah.
Maybe a sister, but not
No, that's a good catch. Thank
a,
you.
not
So then at the end, and I want to talk about this just briefly at the end, is they talk about what to do with the plunder they got. It says if they can be put through fire, put through fire. If it can't be put through fire, then put it through water for cleansing. And some of the things is, if you look at the purification process that they went through, now forget about what is the purpose behind it. What I ask is, how can we relate to this as Christians? They took the plunder, and the priest told them to, whatever can be put through fire to be refined, put through fire. Whatever cannot be put through fire, cleansed with water. And my question is, how do we relate to this action as Christians today? Yeah.
Baptism, because it purifies you. And our bodies can't withstand fire, so it's gonna be water.
Okay, baptism. I was thinking about something else with this though. What alliances have we made? And I look at it from this perspective, is if we're to put the things we watch, we listen to, we say, we type, we post online, we comment on, if we're to put those things through the fire or through the water, what would remain? So our actions, our words, our heart needs to be put through the fire, needs to be put through the water, and see what remains for God. I ask questions of what alliances have we formed with the world? So what alliances have I formed as a person in the world that I have learned to accept certain cultural norms and embrace certain cultural norms that go against what God has commanded us? 1 Peter 1 through 7 and 1 John 4 through 1 tells us to test what comes from God. And that's kind of the same idea along these lines with purification. They get a plunder and they want to remove the sin from it. They put it through fire, they put it through water. Same thing in our lives. We need to take our actions, things that we have, and put it through God's fire and water to learn what should remain and what should be in our lives. It's a hard topic for this one, like I said, but I do think it's something that we need to be able to address on how to answer these questions. I didn't have it up there, but I'll end with this because I thought it was a good one to end with. It's on the handout. Matthew 12, 43 through 45. When an impure spirit comes out of a person, it goes through arid places seeking rest and does not find it. Then it says, I'll return to the house I left. When it arrives, it finds the house unoccupied, swept clean, and put in order.